She didn't believe in love, but she sold it for a living. For Layla, weddings were never about romance. They were puzzles. Chairs sinking in sand, uncles demanding whiskey before noon, brides weeping over the wrong shade of hibiscus. Love was fickle. Logistics were not. At least not until this morning, when both threatened to collapse on her head. She stood under her wide-brimmed straw hat, linen suit pressed, watching Diani beach shimmer with white tents and restless guests. Every detail was in place. Imported roses, crisp tablecloths, an elaborate cake, even doves awaiting release. It was a life she'd built carefully, one clipboard at a time. Layla had learned long ago that feelings were messy, dangerous things, easier to control table settings than a heart that once betrayed her. Planning weddings was her irony and her armor. This morning, however, something was off. A disaster loomed, one that would rattle not just her career as a wedding planner, but the tidy walls she'd built around her own heart. She sensed it before she saw it, like the prickle before a storm. Maybe it was the way the groom kept tugging at his collar, as if it were strangling him. Or maybe it was the bride, Hannah, who, despite her $1,000 gown and impeccable updo, looked like she'd rather be swallowed by the Indian Ocean than walk down the aisle. Layla had seen nerves before. Cold feet were practically a wedding package extra. But this wasn't nerves. This was panic, a quiet, untamed kind that clawed behind Hannah's eyes. When their gazes accidentally locked across the tent, Layla almost looked away. But something in Hannah's look, the unspoken plea of a woman who had been trained her whole life to smile, to obey, to please, rooted her to the spot. And then, Hannah bolted. One moment she was a vision in lace, the next she was tearing across the sand, barefoot, bouquet flung like an abandoned weapon. Guests gasped, cameras clicked, and the groom shouted something drowned by the wind. Layla should have stayed out of it. She was the planner, not a rescuer. Her job was to patch disasters, not sprint after them. But her body betrayed her, moving, before reason could intervene. Her sandals sank into the sand, each step absurdly binding her to a disaster she had no business chasing. Of all the things I signed up for, she muttered under her breath, running after people wasn't one. The bride glanced back once, eyes wide with terror and something else, something unspoken that punched the air from Layla's lungs. In that instant, Layla knew. There would be no dragging this woman back to the altar. So, when the bride darted into the palm grove lining the beach, Layla followed, heart hammering against her ribs, mind screaming at the absurdity of it all. Somewhere behind them, the wedding guests erupted into chaos. Somewhere ahead, trouble waited with open arms. And there, in between, was Layla, caught in a mess that had nothing to do with table settings and everything to do with the stricken look in the bride's eyes as they stumbled deeper into the trees.
Want more content like this?
The wedding had begun to take shape nearly a year ago, over a string of video calls. Across continents, Hannah and Layla pieced together details with the tentative ease of strangers slowly becoming something more. Before long, Hannah was leaning into Layla's instinct, amazed at how easily the woman seemed to understand her, anticipating her wishes long before Hannah voiced them. For Hannah, those calls had been a revelation. Her life in London had been a polished cage, private schools, etiquette lessons, an engagement that had more to do with family legacy than affection. She had never questioned the path laid out for her. Not until Layla, with her dry humour and sharp competence, slipped past Hannah's charade without even trying. When Hannah eventually flew to Diani with her mother to meet the planner, walk the shoreline and inspect the venue, something changed. Layla wasn't just capable, she was luminous in a way that unsettled Hannah. Her laugh carried warmth, her gaze lingered just long enough to leave questions Hannah had never thought to ask herself. Still, everything had gone according to plan, until today. Layla caught up with her just as they emerged onto the road outside the resort. The pathway was chaos dressed in sunlight. Layla had expected that. What she hadn't expected was to be sprinting down its paved surface with a bride still in full lace regalia, dodging caterers and late guests, her bridal bouquet abandoned somewhere between the altar and the gate. "Keep your head down," Layla hissed, as if Hannah's cathedral veil wasn't already visible from space. "I am trying," Hannah panted, hitching up her gown like a marathon runner. "This thing was not designed for fleeing." "Neither was I," Layla responded. It should have been funny. And it was. Just enough to split the tension into gasps of laughter between strides. When they got to the busier part of Diani town, people stared. Vendors paused mid-sale, children pointed. It was impossible not to notice them, though Hannah seemed oblivious, wide-eyed at the sudden clutter of matatas belching smoke, boda-bodas weaving like reckless dragonflies, and tuk-tuks honking at everything including the sky. This is... Oh my God, it's alive out here. Hannah's voice was breathless, half awe, half panic. The colours, the smells, it's... loud, hectic, unforgiving. Layla responded, flagging down a tuk-tuk with the practiced authority of someone who'd done it 100 times. "Welcome to the real world." The driver blinked at Hannah's dress, then at Layla, then back at Hannah again. "Harusi? Wedding?" "No Harusi," Layla snapped. "Drive." The tuk-tuk lurched into motion, rattling down the road with all the grace of a tin can tied to a horse. Hannah clutched the side rail, veil whipping like a flag of surrender, laughter bubbling out in nervous waves. "Is it always this dangerous?" "Yes," Layla said flatly, "and this is the safe option." But she couldn't help it. The corners of her mouth betrayed her, twitching at Hannah's mixture of horror and delight. It was ridiculous. Everything about this was ridiculous. They switched again to a boda-boda when traffic jammed the tuk-tuk into paralysis. Hannah hesitated at the sight of the motorcycle, staring at it as though it were an untamed animal. "You either get on," Layla told her, "or you go back. Your choice." Seconds later, lace and all, Hannah clung to Layla's waist as the boda-boda tore through side streets. Layla tried to focus on the road, on keeping balance, on anything but the warmth pressed against her back. She stiffened, jaw clenched, until Hannah whispered something that broke her composure. "Is this the honeymoon package?" A laugh cracked out of Layla before she could stop it. Sharp, unguarded, real. First time in years she'd let anyone slip past her walls without permission, and it terrified her. By the time they reached the village, the adrenaline had soured into exhaustion. Dust clung to Hannah's hem, her once immaculate dress streaked with earth and sweat. The house Layla led her to was small, cool, shaded by mango trees, a relative's unused place, simple and quiet. A world away from champagne towers and beachfront altars. The small whitewashed cottage was half hidden by palms, with turquoise shutters that echoed the sea. Once inside, silence dropped heavy, thick as the air before a storm. Woven mats warmed the floor, and books leaned in uneven stacks like whispered confessions. Beside them, a two-seater dining table kept quiet company with a narrow bed, veiled in the dreamy drift of a mosquito net. Hannah perched on the edge of one of the dining chairs, shoulders trembling now that there was no crowd to impress, no aisle to march. Her eyes found Layla's, questioning, as if the wedding planner held answers to her unspoken queries. Layla looked away, busied herself with pouring water from a jug, anything to avoid that gaze. She could still feel the echo of Hannah's arms around her on the boda, still hear the laughter in her ear. It was dangerous, all of it. She set the glass on the table between them. "Drink. Rest. I'll make us dinner. Tomorrow we figure out what you've actually done." Hannah nodded. For a moment, neither spoke. Only the sound of cicadas filled the room. The world shall soon catch up with them. And now came the terrifying question. What next? The night air carried an unmistakable, briny scent, part salt, part seaweed, part something ancient. The cottage wasn't built for grandeur, but for intimacy, a place where the world fell away, and where closeness felt less like chance and more like inevitability. That evening, the storm of adrenaline had finally fizzled out, leaving the kind of silence that doesn't just sit in a room, but presses against the walls, daring someone to puncture it. Hannah lay sprawled on the bed, still in the half-undone chaos of her gown, veil long abandoned in a corner like a flag of surrender. She'd stopped trembling, but her eyes were wide, fixed on the wobbly ceiling fan as though it might whisper answers. Layla sat on the woven mat, watching Hannah in the dim glow of a kerosene lamp. Her pulse still drummed in her neck, refusing to calm even as the world outside softened into crickets and surf. "You know," Hannah said, breaking the silence, "I don't think I've ever sweated this much in my life, not even during hot yoga." Layla arched an eyebrow. "Welcome to Kenya. The humidity here could outlast any hot yoga session." Hannah let out a small laugh, brittle but real. It surprised Layla how quickly laughter had managed to find its way into this wreckage. Silence again, heavier this time. Layla busied herself with folding the corner of her kanga over her knees, because looking at Hannah for too long felt unsafe. Dangerous, even. "You probably think I'm crazy," Hannah said quietly. "Running away like that." "I think," Layla said carefully, "that you've caused me more trouble in one morning than most bridezillas manage in a year." That earned another laugh, though it cracked at the edges. "I couldn't do it, Layla. I stood there and realized I was about to marry a man who knows more about the horsepower of his cars than the sound of my laugh. And everyone, my mother, my father, they all told me to smile, be grateful, be beautiful, as if that's all I am." The words spilled like a confession rehearsed in silence too many times, finally freed. Layla felt her throat tighten. She kept her face blank, though. She had mastered that art long ago, masking the twitch of sympathy, the flicker of recognition. "You think I don't know cages?" she said at last, her voice a shade lower. "I've lived in one all my life, woven tighter than your lace." Hannah turned, joined Layla on the floor, her gaze locking onto hers. "What kind of cage?" Layla hesitated. She hadn't planned on saying anything, but the stillness, the isolation, the way Hannah's eyes held her, it tugged something loose. "The kind where being yourself isn't permitted," she said finally. Her voice broke slightly on the words. Hannah's gaze softened. She didn't push. Instead, she whispered, "So maybe we're both running from prisons we didn't build." The words settled between them like an unwanted guest, heavy, undeniable. Layla stood abruptly, needing to move, to do anything that wasn't drowning in those wide, searching eyes. She paced the cramped room, careful to avoid the shadows that seemed to lean closer. "Don't romanticize it," she muttered, sinking onto a nearby chair. "Running doesn't solve anything. It just delays the collapse." Hannah stayed quiet, chin propped on her hand as she mulled over the words. Her gown slipped from one shoulder unnoticed, while she traced the hem absent-mindedly with her fingers. She looked far away, caught in thoughts she couldn't untangle. Then, without seeming to decide, she shifted, knees sinking into the rug as she drifted toward Layla. It wasn't deliberate, more like a thought pulling her body along. Half-formed words mumbled at her lips, but before she could speak, she realized just how close she was. Her hand, searching for balance, found the edge of the chair, brushing Layla's. Just skin against skin, a flicker of warmth. And yet it shot through Layla like fire in dry grass, leaving the air too thick to breathe. Their eyes met. Neither pulled away. For a suspended moment, the world went hushed. The hiss of the lamp, the night sounds outside, even Layla's own heartbeat, all blurred into nothing. Hannah leaned a fraction closer, as if pulled by gravity. She still carried the faint trace of jasmine from the flowers still caught in her undone hair. The intimacy wasn't in kisses or declarations, but in proximity. Breath mingling, want unspoken. Abruptly, Layla flinched back, breaking the moment like shattering glass. She rose, putting the chair between them like a shield. "No," she said too quickly, too harsh. "This can't. It's not." Hannah's lips parted, but no words came. The silence that followed was heavier than before, thick with want and refusal. Layla gripped the back of the chair until her knuckles grew pale. She couldn't allow this. Not again. Not with her. And yet, every part of her wanted to. Desperately. The days blurred into each other. The safe house, tucked between half-built villas and bougainvillea gone feral, became its own suspended world. The next day, Layla stepped out briefly for a handful of groceries from a nearby shop. Upon return, the kitchen bore the faint smell of onions and impending disaster. Hannah gripped the knife like it might run off. The slices came out thick, thin, and then something resembling abstract art. Chores were alien to Hannah, yet surprisingly, by that second afternoon, she and Layla moved in sync. "Careful," Layla said from the doorway. "I am careful," Hannah shot back, blinking even as her eyes watered. She swiped her wrist across her cheek, leaving a streak that made her look like a weepy linebacker. "But I think this knife has a personal vendetta." Layla's brow lifted. "Don't smirk," Hannah warned, hacking again. The knife slipped, sending half an onion chunk skittering off the counter and onto the floor. She groaned. "Brilliant!" That did it. Layla laughed, the sound breaking sharp and warm in the cramped room. Hannah flushed, but for once she didn't feel ridiculous. She wasn't the polished guest or the runaway bride. She was a woman botching lunch and somehow earning a laugh from the only person whose opinion she cared about. Oddly enough, it felt like victory. Later, during cleanup, Hannah's arm was slick with soap, suds dripping into the sink. She kept her gaze on the water when she said, almost too casually, "I've never been in love." Layla stilled beside her, the plate in her hand suspended mid-air. For a moment, the only sound was the clink of water against porcelain. "I have," she said finally, her voice low. "Once." That pulled Hannah's eyes up to her. Layla set the plate down carefully, as if even that small weight could betray her. "It ended badly," she admitted, each word deliberate, sharp at the edges. "Taught me love can be dangerous." The silence that followed didn't feel empty. It stretched, tender and fragile, like something that might shatter if they moved too quickly. When Hannah spoke again, her voice was softer, more vulnerable. "Then maybe I'll learn from you what not to fear." Layla's lips curved, a smile that carried both warmth and regret. "Or maybe you'll learn that some risks cut deeper than they're worth." For the first time, those words felt unconvincing even to herself. She still felt the ghost of Hannah's touch, that accidental brush of fingers 2 nights ago. A touch that lingered longer in her memory than it had on her skin. She told herself it meant nothing, that she'd learned that lesson already, years ago, when she trusted the wrong woman with her truth, only to be left holding shame like a knife pressed against her ribs, judgment from her community weighing heavy on her shoulders. Since then, she had built her walls high, higher than the ocean cliffs of Diani. But Hannah was scaling them without even knowing. On the 3rd day, Hannah was still undecided about what to do next. Staying cooped up at the cottage wasn't yielding any answers, so she insisted on accompanying Layla to the market, her pale hands clutching a small basket like it was armour, and Layla hadn't had the heart to refuse. The market smelled of fish, dust, and too many opinions. Layla moved quickly, Hannah trailing a step behind with her basket clutched like a shield. People noticed. Of course they did. Layla felt the pause in their conversations, subtle glances that lingered a fraction too long. "Why are they staring?" Hannah whispered. "They're not," Layla lied smoothly, even as an elderly woman muttered something into her scarf. Hannah leaned closer. "They're absolutely staring. I can feel it in my spleen." Layla almost smiled at that, but tightened her shawl instead. It would be easier, safer, not to bring Hannah here. But when Hannah stopped at a spice stall, eyes lighting up over cardamom pods like she'd discovered buried treasure, Layla stayed quiet. Hannah fumbled with the coins, dropping one in the process. The vendor's expression darkened. Without hesitation, Layla slid the correct amount across the counter, enduring the man's raised brow. It was nothing, really, just a tiny correction, a quiet shield. But when Hannah beamed over her prize, like a child who'd won something rare, Layla smiled and thought, "Let them stare. I'll take it." That afternoon, a knock at their door turned her blood to ice. The cottage manager leaned in, polite smile too sharp. "You're Layla Yusuf, yes? The wedding planner?" His eyes darted past her shoulder, into the room where Hannah sat perched on the bed. Layla stiffened. "She's just a client, last-minute venue scouting." The lie came too quickly, too thin. The man's smile stretched, the kind that meant he didn't believe a word but enjoyed the performance. Of course, just make sure she's safe, eh? People are asking questions. When the door shut, Hannah let out a shaky laugh that didn't reach her eyes. They'll find me, won't they? Layla wanted to say no, to promise safety, to build a fortress around this woman who had asked for nothing but a sliver of freedom. Instead, she chose the crueler truth. Not if you stay quiet, not if you stop acting like you're untouchable. The words landed like a slap. Hannah's shoulders squared, bristling. I'm sorry. Is this my fault now? Should I apologize? For existing too loudly? For not fitting into your neat little box of shame and secrets? The flare of anger in her voice tore something open in Layla she thought she had buried years ago. You think this is a game? That running off from a wedding with your father's money on the line and half the town watching is just romance? People don't forgive women like us. They don't even see us, unless it's to crush us. Silence. Then Hannah's chin lifted, eyes bright with something sharper than defiance. Us. The word hung there, exposed. Layla looked away, too late. Hannah saw it, the admission she hadn't meant to make. Their breaths came hard, uneven, like they'd been running, toward or away from something invisible. The room felt smaller, the ceiling pressing down. Hannah had never been drawn to women before, never once considered it. And yet with Layla, there was a quiet gravity, a magnetism that had pervaded all their interactions. A pull she couldn't shake. You keep pushing me away, Hannah said, her voice breaking against the fury. But you're the one who's terrified, not me. Something inside Layla snapped taut. She turned, her words a growl in the charged air between them. Terrified? You don't know what fear is. Hannah didn't flinch. She stepped in, reckless, dangerous, close enough that her shoulder brushed Layla's. Then show me. The distance collapsed. Layla's hand found Hannah's arm without thought, a grip that should have shoved her back, but instead held her there. Hannah's breath mingled with hers, warm and wild, their foreheads nearly brushing. For a second, the world tilted, lips hovered. Not yet touching, but charged, trembling on the edge of that first plunge. Layla could smell jasmine tangled in Hannah's undone hair, could hear the uneven hitch of her breath, could feel how close she was to falling. And then she broke. She wrenched back as though desire itself had burned her lungs. No. The word came guttural, ripped from someplace raw. Hannah froze, eyes wide, colour flooding her cheeks. When she spoke, her voice was a whisper trembling on new ground. I've never wanted this before. Not with anyone, not with a woman. Layla's chest ached. She wanted to comfort, to confess, to close the distance all over again. Instead, she did what she'd always done. Built walls. You don't know what you want, she said, harsher than she meant. And even if you did, I can't give it to you. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was crowded, with the echo of their almost kiss, with the weight of past scars and new desire, with the pounding truth neither dared claim. Outside, the world prowled for Hannah, but inside this room the real danger had already been set alight, smouldering between them, waiting. By the fourth day, the cottage could no longer keep her hidden. The whispers sharpened into threats, her brother's voice on voicemail, low and furious, her mother's messages alternating between pleading and shaming. Her father sending word through anyone who would listen that he would end Layla's career if his daughter wasn't returned intact. Even Layla's clients began calling, uneasy about hiring a planner whose name was suddenly tied to scandal. Hiding had stopped being refuge. It had become surrender. The walls no longer protected Hannah. They pressed in on her, suffocating, reminding her that every hour in hiding cost Layla something. And so, when the world finally forced its way in, Hannah had little choice but to step out of the shadows and face the fire. I have to face them tomorrow, Hannah whispered as they settled into sleep that night, the tension between them still palpable. The ballroom smelled of roses and judgment. Layla stood at the edge, clipboard gone slack in her hands, as Hannah was pinned between her parents and her fiancé like prey in a gilded trap. Her father's words cut like knives, ungrateful, reckless, shameful. Her mother's silence did worse. It shrank the room until Hannah looked small against the weight of it. The groom flexed his fists, as though propriety was something he could strangle into submission. She disappears for days, her father spat, his gaze slicing toward Layla, sharp as glass. And you, his lip curled, enable it, unprofessional, disgraceful. The accusation burned hot, and Layla forced her spine straight, though her throat closed tight. She wanted to defend Hannah, to step in front of her like a shield, but her body locked. To fight now might mean losing her forever. Then Hannah spoke. "I can't," she blurted, her voice thin, breaking but unstoppable. Her mother finally stirred, steel in her tone. "You can't what?" Hannah's chest rose and fell like someone drowning. Then the words spilled, fierce and trembling. "I can't marry him. I can't keep living like this, wearing dresses I didn't choose, smiling for photos I don't want. I can't keep pretending." The air fractured. Chandeliers loomed above them like frozen judgment. Her father's face darkened, the groom's curdled, her mother's shattered into porcelain fury. Layla's pulse roared in her ears. Hannah looked like a woman at a cliff's edge, dizzy from the view, terrified of the fall, but she leapt anyway. After a heated exchange, the exits swallowed her family one by one. Her father's fury, her mother's silence, the groom's poison whispered against her ear before he stormed out. The slams of their departure left the air raw, vibrating in Layla's chest. The wreckage around them was obscene. Roses trampled into bruised petals, champagne bleeding across the floor, centerpieces sagging under their own gaudiness. Amid it, Hannah stood trembling but unbroken. "I choose me," she whispered. The words hung fragile at first, then steadied, louder. "I choose me." Layla's breath caught. It should have sounded like liberation. Instead, it felt like a sentence. Every warning she carried, her faith, her family's memory, the old heartbreak that carved her hollow, surged to the surface. Safety meant retreat. It always had. But Hannah turned then, eyes catching Layla's like flint striking stone. Something raw and electric leapt between them. Layla felt the distance collapse, though neither moved. She was too aware of the space between their bodies, how little it would take to cross it. The tremble in Hannah's hands, the way her mouth parted like she might speak, or kiss, or shatter. Layla gripped her clipboard tighter, as if it could anchor her. Don't. Don't. But her body betrayed her. She shifted closer, almost imperceptibly. Close enough to catch the salt at the corner of Hannah's lips, the wild heat rolling off her skin. And then Hannah broke. A sob, strangled but raw, shook through her. It undid Layla's resolve in an instant. The clipboard slipped from her hand as she pulled Hannah against her chest. For a heartbeat, Hannah resisted, stiff in her grief. Then, she melted, shoulders heaving as she buried herself in Layla's arms. Layla held her tighter than she meant to, the scent of salt and hibiscus tangling in the early evening air. Walls she had spent years fortifying crumbled in silence. "Just breathe," she whispered, though her own lungs felt starved. They stood, that way until the world quieted around them, until Hannah's sobs softened into shivers. Only then did Layla loosen her hold, brushing a strand of hair from Hannah's damp cheek. The cottage welcomed them back in heavy silence, broken only by the low hum of the fridge and the faint rasp of crickets outside. Layla sat at the table, her plate mostly untouched, her eyes fixed on a candle stub between them. She'd cooked but hadn't eaten. The homemade stew steamed in the space between them, fragrant and forgotten. Hannah, her hair loose now, dark strands brushing her collarbone, set her fork down. She didn't like the silence. Not after what had cracked open earlier, when Layla admitted her fear of wanting something she wasn't supposed to. "You're doing it again," Hannah said softly. Layla looked up, startled. "Doing what?" "Building walls no one asked for." Her voice trembled, not with anger, but with insistence. "You said you were afraid. That's the only honest thing you've given me all night. Don't take it back." Layla's jaw worked. She wanted to retreat, But Hannah wasn't letting her. "Tell me," she pressed, leaning forward. "What is it you're so afraid of?" The words tumbled out, jagged, messy, as if torn from her. "I've wanted you since before I ever should have. Since the planning, the late-night video calls, the way you looked at me across papers and fabric swatches. I fought it. God, I fought it. You terrify me." Hannah's breath caught, but her gaze held steady. Her pulse thundered, and the honesty cracked something open in her too. "Do you think you're alone in that?" she whispered. "Do you think I haven't been fighting just as hard?" Layla shook her head, almost laughing, almost crying. No, you were untouchable. I thought I was imagining it." Hannah reached across the table, her hand brushing Layla's knuckles. A spark leapt at the contact. Layla froze, but she didn't pull away. "You weren't," Hannah murmured. It began there, the first breach in restraint. Layla's hand turned, palm up, gripping hers too tightly. Hannah rose slowly, as though approaching a wild animal that might bolt. She circled the table, stopping in front of her. Layla tilted her face upward, eyes wide and vulnerable. Hannah cupped her cheek. A thumb swept across damp skin, brushing away a tear she hadn't realized fell. Layla leaned into the touch like it was both forbidden and inevitable. "Tell me to stop," Hannah whispered. Layla's lips parted, but no sound came. Instead, her fingers closed around Hannah's wrist, anchoring her there, and that was all the permission either of them needed. Layla rose, closed the gap, and claimed Hannah's mouth in a rush. The kiss was raw, unpracticed. It was trembling, fierce, the kind of kiss that comes after too long pretending you don't need it. It stumbled between hunger and hesitation. Messy, human, more relief than technique. Breathless, they clung like the world might pry them apart. Breaths tangled and desperation bled into tenderness. Layla made a sound low in her throat, half relief, half hunger. Hannah pushed closer, pressing her back against the wall, hands roamed, frantic yet reverent, learning the curves they'd only dared to imagine. "God, you're real," Hannah murmured against her mouth. Layla's laugh broke apart into a gasp as fingers slid under her shirt, tracing the warm skin of her waist. Hannah's mouth travelled down her jaw, her throat, her collarbone, leaving heat in its wake. Layla tipped her head back, surrendering, her body arching into every touch. They stumbled toward the bed, half blind with urgency. Clothes were discarded in a trail, each piece shedding another layer of restraint. By the time they collapsed onto the bed, they were bare in every sense, skin to skin, breathless, trembling. The intimacy was both exploration and confession. Hands mapped, mouths claimed, every gasp and moan a truth spoken without words. Hannah's fingers threaded through Layla's hair, pulling her close, while Layla's hands clutched at her back as if to keep her from vanishing. "Look at me," Hannah whispered, her voice breaking. Layla did, their eyes locking, her defenses dissolved as their bodies moved together, uncoordinated, desperate until they found a rhythm that left them both undone. It wasn't practiced. It was raw, a collision of a want and fear finally surrendered to. When release came, it tore through them like a storm, leaving them shaking, clinging, whispering each other's names as though anchoring themselves against the tide. After, they lay tangled in sheets damp with sweat and breath, laughter bubbling up through the exhaustion. Hannah pressed her forehead to Layla's, still catching her breath. "We're terrible at pretending." Layla smiled, eyes shining. "Then let's stop." The dawn came anyway, daring them to face what waited beyond the cottage walls. But for now, they had chosen each other, and that was enough.